Hello, Tim Wilmot here, and welcome to another watercolor tutorial. This time focusing on getting some strong verticals into your composition and the importance of contrasts, a range of values in watercolor. So this is my source subject. This is Livorno in Italy, a very pretty town, and well, it could be anywhere, but this photograph of mine, I think, will help me demonstrate the importance of verticals and contrasts in your composition and your watercolor painting. So first of all, looking at this source photo, I can point out some of the things I'm looking for when contemplating a scene to paint. So first of all, the lighting. The lighting here it's almost contre jour. It's coming from the right-hand side. So we've got a strong bit of sunlight coming in from the right-hand side there. You can see this lovely shard of light coming across the scene. So that's good from a lighting point of view. We've got a good initial composition that we can work with. This video is all about strong verticals. So on the right-hand side of the nice frame, we've got this lovely side of the building with a sort of jagged edge to it as well. There's two vehicles here, a van and a car. Scrub those out. Don't bother putting those in. I just don't think it's going to work having just half of a vehicle in there. Not really good from in my opinion, from a composition point of view. But these vehicles over in the middle ground, they're really what I'm looking for. They're what sort of capture my interest as a subject here, especially this lorry, this van here. Look at the white compared to that darkness there. So having a very light area against a very dark area, I think, is generally a good thing to do in watercolor, rather than this dark bit being over there somewhere and this light bit being over there. Slap them together, bring them together, have a little bit of contrast. And these row of cars, again, an opportunity to have the light of the vehicles and some dark shadows. You often find the shadows underneath cars, they can be quite dark compared to shadows in the immediate area around a car. So I guess because of the proximity of the object to the ground, there's less light kind of getting into that area. So we have a darker value. Also, we've got some darkness going up the street. So going up the street there, some darkness here being caused by the building on the right-hand side. The light's coming from the right, and we've got a lovely sort of shape of shadows there. I'm going to, as I normally do, I'm going to sneak in a couple of figures, which sometimes, you imagine, just figures here in your mind, or you might do a thumbnail sketch of some figures that may be, typically in a sunny scene like this, you'd have figures maybe walking more in the shade. So why not have those figures over in the shade? So rather than those cars there, let's have a couple of figures in the scene. So a nice initial composition to work with, a good play on contrasts and a range of values, and this strong vertical. Yeah, we've got some strong horizontals as well. That lovely rooftop there, typical Italian urban architecture. These sort of fairly low pitch rooftops, and giving us a strong line there. So plenty of strong lines to work with, and things to play around with. So let's see how we get on. The paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford. This is 15 inches across by 11 inches down. I'll describe the colours as I go through them, but my paper is medium texture, cold press, 300 grams in weight, pretty average, but it's important to have good quality watercolor paper as an initial start. So this is taped down with some masking tape on the sides there, just to secure it. I don't pre-wet the paper. I'm often asked, do you pre-wet the paper? Generally speaking, not. I may dampen areas of the scene before starting to paint, but I don't stretch the paper as such. I find that just using the masking tape works well, and things will buckle a little bit, but as the paint dries, it's going to get flatter as you get that smoother surface. First step, initial drawing. I'm using a soft pencil here, so it's fairly dark, so I'll be able to see through the layers of paint. I'll be able to see that outline, and I don't mind too much the pencil mark showing through the end painting. I think it's one of the charms of a loose painting, to see, to see the workings of the artist, whoever did the painting, just to see their thought process. And I don't mind too much those little lines showing through. But I'm here getting in the initial shapes of the objects. And obviously a key thing is this row of cars going across the middle of the scene, just below the halfway line there. And I got in the outline of the tops of the buildings, the sharp corner. So it's going to be a nice hard edge for me, that corner. Well, it's two hard edges actually. The far building where the street goes down into the distance, that vertical there. And then of course this right hand vertical, strong vertical on the right hand side. What is important is the first car I drew there in the middle, or just to the right of the middle. My plan is to have that nice, like the van in the scene. So I've swapped it for a smaller vehicle. Have that as my area of contrast. Leave the paper white. Don't paint that. Resist the temptation of painting over that. Try not to use, use white paint minimally, if that's the right word, minimally, and get that freshness of the white paper against the darkest area. That would be the darkest area of my picture. So that's something that I do think about when working through the composition, planning the painting, is where is going to be the darkest area, where is going to be the lightest area, and if I can, try and move those so that they're connecting with each other. Now, drawing done, onto the initial wash where I'm going to be covering all of the paper, and I want the sky, because the light's coming from the right hand side, the sky on the right hand side is going to be lighter, and then we're going to go a little bit darker over to the left hand side. Now, because I'm not seeing an awful amount of the sky, it's sort of like the top quarter, if you like, of the scene. I don't want to go too dark above at the top, at the very top edge. As it, if the sky was a big part of the proportion of the painting, then yes, I would go quite dark at the top and come light down to the horizon, but sort of a similar value, but certainly a little bit lighter on the right hand side, and try and get some soft edges as it transitions into the street going away into the distance. Now, this will be so after the sky came down over the rooftops, and excuse the glare there with my lighting. As it dries, that glare, that little bit of glare will disappear. But I'm just really getting the underlying colours of the buildings. The buildings going down to the street, I won't paint over that again. They're almost a similar value to the sky above on the right hand side, those buildings down the right hand side. And also the building on the left hand side, that won't be painted again. On the very extreme side of the street on the left hand side, that won't be painted again. That will be left as is, apart from some shadows. But the building, the main building going across the scene facing us, that will be, I will go over that again with a much darker colour in the next stage. Right, again, just some underlying colour for the right hand side. So just to repeat, I drag the sky over the buildings, and then with a thicker paint, so as I don't get too much bleeding or any blooms appearing, I'm going up against that sky to get in some cases a nice soft edge, right down to the street level, and try and get in a few different colours. The value of the street is similar to the sky. So the sky is light, then across the middle is dark. Then we've got little speckles of light with the light hitting the cars, and then a bit of a dark shadow underneath them, and then another lighter horizontal band with that shard of light coming from a gap between the buildings, and then darker still coming to the foreground near us, near where we are. And I think that having those bands of light, dark, I think works quite well in watercolor, as well as in this example, the light of the car hitting the background of the buildings, the little corner, little recess of that building. I'm just lifting off a little bit there, and again trying to, with this damp brush, I'm making sure that that area is quite light, and then just subtly over to the left hand side go a little bit darker. If I do notice some areas of the scene getting either blending too much into each other or being a bit too dark, there's another technique there, just lifting off with a paper tissue. So damp brush below those two figures, and a paper towel or a paper tissue or something similar, just crunched up, or maybe getting a smooth edge just to gently lift it off. And you've got to do that. Really, timing is important. Don't leave it too late. Don't do it too early. Don't leave it too late. And just practicing with if you're lifting off with a brush, practicing how damp that brush is. Things will dry lighter. It looks a little bit darker now, but it will dry a shade or two lighter. If you imagine a value scale of, say, 0 to 10, and 0 might be white and 10 would be black, then all the sort of variations. So in the middle, 5 would be the middle grey if we were looking at a black and white photo. Things are going to dry 1 or 2 steps lighter than they are. So with watercolor, you've got to compensate and go a little bit darker than you think. And then also, as well as the value, also introducing different colors into the scene, particularly on the buildings there and the road. They're sort of being influenced by the colors of buildings around them, and the sun coming into this enclosed area and bouncing off different surfaces. There's lots of different influences of the underlying colours of the different areas, particularly on that street level. Just go through my palette while things are drying up quite nicely, hopefully. So palette on the right hand side, normal colours. I very rarely change these, haven't changed them in about 40 years. From the top, a neutral tint or a Payne's grey. So neutral tint is, well, it's grey, basically. And that added to another colour can suddenly make that colour a lot darker. So I quite often will add that to, say, an ultramarine blue or an alizarin crimson, to get, you know, like a warmer grey or a cooler grey, for speed and getting a darker colour quickly. And speed is quite important in watercolour. You know, things are drying quite quickly, so you've got to be, timing is very important. So you've got to be working relatively quickly. Anyway, so that's neutral tint, then burnt umber, which I don't often use, burnt sienna, then a yellow ochre, then a viridian green. Actually, the viridian green with burnt umber makes a great green for foliage, in my opinion, but more on that on another video. Then cobalt green, or sometimes a cobalt turquoise. Then coming down towards the middle, we've got a cerulean blue, which I used for the sky in combination with a cobalt blue in the middle. So cerulean blue, cobalt blue, then ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, then a Windsor red. I'll just check this as everything is quite dry here with the fingers in an area that I know is not going to show, just in case I smudge the surface of the paint. So it feels quite dry. Alizarin crimson, then a Windsor red, which is what I use there. A little bit of alizarin crimson, bit of Windsor red, alizarin crimson, getting darker. So I've got a slightly smaller mop brush here with natural hair. Just keep mixing. Sometimes I'll be mixing more than actual painting. It's quite important to get that value right. You know, on a white, obviously the palette's white, so you can pretty much judge what the colour is going to be, and check the edge on the brush as well. Check that I've not got too much water on the brush. I want a good edge here, nice crisp edge for the top of the building. So I'm generally going to work from top to bottom on this one and get in that top building first of all. Continuing on with the colours, so Windsor red. I used to use cadmium red, but changed that to a Windsor red. Just as good, in my opinion. It's quite a bright red. And then we've got a light red, great for these sorts of Mediterranean scenes like this, where you want that sort of terracotta type of a red. That's quite a nice one. And then cadmium orange, and right down the bottom there, which is completely been dirted up, is a lemon yellow. The brands there can be anything, but I go for professional grade paint, so not sort of really cheap stuff. And it's tube paint as well, not the hard pans, because with the hard pans you're going to wear out your brushes they're too hard. They're going to damage the hairs, the point on a brush. So a lot of brushes you get, if you pay good money for them, a nice sable or whatever your brush you're going for, if you know, if you're constantly using that to eke out the last bit of paint in a hard pan, you're going to ruin your brush. which is the last thing you want, because often the brushes will cost a lot more than the paints. And a good brush could last a good few years, maybe even longer, depending on how often you're using it. Anyway, back to the painting. There is my dark value down in that recess, going around that car and continuing on down the street with the shadow being caused by buildings on the right hand side, and over to these couple of figures walking down the street. Bit of careful painting around those figures. They won't be left white like that. They're going to be coloured in to some extent. I don't know exactly what when I start the painting. Right, building facing us, quite an important building. As I did with the underlying wash, I want to try and get in a number of different colours in here. It's quite a large area quite a large area on the actual painting, so I want to not have it too boring. So as I come down, it will get a little bit darker. And that's another hard edge on the left-hand side, with the light building on the left touching this middle long building. Doesn't matter if I leave little areas of the paper unpainted. They can be, well, I cover one up there, but they can be made into things. A little bit of light catching some bit of architecture, window ledge, or a window frame or something like that. Right, very loosely. Now the brush is fairly dry now. Just go over the top of the building, the rooftop there. Leave a thin slither of light. Do you see just where my brush is now? Thin slither of light there, because the light's coming from the right hand side. Just that little bit of light mix. Very thin line, but it can make all the difference. Right, darker still as we come down to the parked cars, the row of cars. And I very often just, with a damp brush, I'll just, as you saw me there, just pick up 2 or 3 colours quickly and almost mixing them, excuse me, almost mixing them on the paper. There are ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, bit of burnt sienna. Can't be too scientific with the mixing of colours. The actual intensity of the darks and the thickness of paint is more important, and we are definitely getting a little bit thicker here as we go down to the cars. You can use your fingers as well to mix things around. And just above the white car is a little thin vertical line, so I've got a little bit of light on the rooftop, a little bit of light on the right hand side. Just makes all the difference too, just to tell the viewer that that is the edge of the building there, and it's catching the light. Strong shadow on the left-hand building. Doesn't matter if it bleeds into the main building that's facing us. Because it's on the left-hand side, because it's on the very edge of the painting, I don't think I should put too much detail in there. And at street level, just a little shadow there, perhaps coming from a car or something, just to explain that is the street level. That's the transition from the edge of the building down and then across the street. Tidy up that dark area above the building there. Now, fairly dry brush, right hand side. Try and make a sort of interesting edge to this building, not a hard straight line, something interesting. I'm looking at my source photograph for this, and there's lots of, I think there was scaffolding, and it could be some signs coming out of a building and window ledges and so on. But I just want this to be a hard edge, but an interesting edge, not a straight edge. And then just a little bit lighter as it comes towards us. So fairly dark together edge, dry brush. In other words, not too much water on the brush. Okay. And now darker down towards the street. And with my brush there, I'm just dabbing. Everything is still quite moist, everything is still quite damp, and I'm just dabbing going up into that building area just to give a bit more form to it. The paint, with watercolor, things are still moving. Nothing stands still until it dries, particularly if you've got a slope on your board. Obviously, the steeper the slope, the more it's going to travel. But depending on the texture of your paper and how thick the paint is and the gradient, you're going to get some travelling. So keep going up there and into that painted area and introduce some extra shapes. Now, very important, shadows across the foreground and making them fairly soft over to the left hand side, so darker with a harder edge on the right hand side, and then as we come over to the left, softer, bottom right corner, dark again. That's not getting too much light. I'm painting over the masking tape, so when I peel off that tape, I'll get a nice crisp white edge. While that, generally with figures that are going to be connected with shadows, I'll paint in the shadows first, and then assuming the figures are above that shadow area, I'll paint them second. So starting off with their faces and now some clothing, also thinking about the values around these figures. So this one, I'll have this right-hand figure. Let's imagine they've got a dark jacket on, but a light top. So again, a little bit of contrast there, tiny bit of contrast, light against the dark. Figure, check my edge, figure on the left-hand side, maybe a sort of bluish top. And then drop the figure shapes into the shadows below, and then just leave it. Don't muck about with it too much, because you could ruin the effect of what watercolor is doing. So just let that take its own course. Right, back to these vehicles, and I need to get a bit of shadow on this car, and just a tiny bit of paint for the wheels. Generally speaking, I won't paint in too much detail on cars. For example, the wheel arch or wing mirrors or aerials or any other paraphernalia on there. But think about the main shapes of the windscreen and the rest of the body of the car and the shadow between cars or the shadow below cars. Now, because there's a bit of light coming from these vehicles, I might need to just lift off a tiny bit of paint from the shadow area, the foreground shadow. Again, you can do this in a number of ways. Just lift off with a brush or with a paper tissue or something like that, or fingertips with in a controlled way. There's the all-important shadow underneath the cars. And this is darker paint, but thicker paint, and it's going to just ever so slightly give me a bit of a soft edge between the shadow and the shadow going up on the shadow on the street and the shadow on the cars. Adding a few little lines from the street up to the figure. So I'm trying to join up these different shapes as well, so that they're not too on their own. They're sort of part of the overall picture, connecting all these different things together. Just let this dry now a little bit. So I've really got in the main darker values now, which is part of my stage 3 of doing a painting. So one obviously was doing the drawing, 2 getting the wash, 3 the darker values to build in depth and contrast into the scene. As this foreground shadow is still quite damp, I can lift out with a drier brush now. So there's the edge of the pavement, the edge of the street, also perhaps some lines on the right-hand side to emphasize the perspective of the right-hand building, and make sure it's really dry there. Eke out the last bit of moisture from that brush. Could be done actually I'm using a natural hairbrush here, but if you had a synthetic brush, more of a springy brush, that might be a little bit better. And doesn't matter if they're complete lines, just see what it's doing. Some areas will be damper than others, so you'll get a softer edge to these lines perhaps, but just let it do what it's going to do. So I've now talking about synthetic brushes. I'm now got out just an ordinary synthetic brush, small brush, to do the details. Now a lot of up where I'm painting now, that's quite dry, but still down below in the foreground, that's still quite damp. So I need to be careful with I'm right-handed. I need to be careful not to smudge things too much on below my hand. But add in some details, just little incidental dark lines, brush marks, and there's not too much water on this brush, okay? It's quite a lot of paint, and I'm just looking at picking up bits of details of windows, some more verticals, mainly windows. I don't want to overdo the windows, and I want to keep them fairly loose. So, of course, a window is a rectangle or a square, but when we squint our eyes and we look at distant windows, sometimes we'll just see a shape within the recess of a window or the dark shutters of a window. So the actual window itself could be quite light, but either side, left and right, there could be a dark mark there. So just very light touches of the brush here and there to give the impression of these windows. I should say something about my mixing areas as well. So at the top, so I went through my colours, but at the top I generally mix the darks, and then in the middle, so there's 3 mixing wells. In the middle generally will be the cools or the blues, and then down the bottom, the 3rd mixing well will be warms, reds, oranges, whatever. So I've now just gone against what I've just said. Doesn't matter. On the next painting, I could probably just mop up that dark paint on that middle palette. It doesn't matter. Put some cables across the street. That can be going back to what I was saying earlier about connecting, say, 2 sides of the street. So cables going across the street is going to help. A banner, maybe, if it's a fete going on, something like that. Perhaps a banner might help. So just something to connect the 2 sides. Some dark shadow underneath the edge of the roof, and a few windows. Nothing too precise, just little marks and a few verticals as well, a few horizontals just to pick up on some of the architectural details of that building. Very often I find there's quite enough water lurking in my mixing wells for this final stage, because this small brush doesn't need a lot of water. So very often there's enough water already in the palette for this. Some of these windscreens I'm going to make darker. It's down to observation. Just look at the scene, a street scene with cars, and some windscreens, they're all at different angles. They're curved as well. So they can be quite complex reflective objects to get sort of looking quite nice in a painting. So not have them all the same colour, not have them all the same value. can see there that the shadows that I was doing, they're still quite damp or moist, and with this paper towel I can lift off that colour quite easily. I must be in a fairly, it's not too warm, the conditions in the room where I am, or too dry, so that will maybe slow down the painting, the drying time. And where I'm painting now, it's still quite moist, so with the thicker paint, it just gives me ever such a sort of subtle, soft edge to it. Define the base of the building where it hits the street level. Getting a few more marks on this right-hand side, just to create the impression of some windows or doorways. But as I was saying on the left-hand side, this is on the right-hand side, the most important thing here was getting that strong edge, these vertical edges, hard edges, to give a bit of impact into the scene. Street scenes can generally benefit from a few tire marks, which will help with perspective, leading the eye into the scene. Okay, just a few of them will help. Maybe some marks there on the edge of the road. Perhaps there's a bit of light on the pavement there, side where that figure's light clothing is perhaps giving some reflection. Just need to add in some more final touches with a few little tiny verticals, little aerials, so verticals there on the building. A few aerials here and there. On these houses, there's not too many aerials. Maybe there's some, the local council prevent you putting too many structures on rooftops, but yeah, just a few there to assist giving extra interest with those verticals. So this is the finished painting. A study of values, contrasts, and strong verticals in a composition, a scene in Livorno, Italy. We covered my 4 stages of doing watercolor, the drawing, then getting in the wash, trying to watch out for keeping areas unpainted, certain areas unpainted there, which will be providing the lights, and then getting in really dark areas with those greater depths. But getting the drawing right, getting the initial wash, painting over all the areas except the white areas, and then the third stage, going in with the darks, so thicker, darker colour. And as I was trying to do here, so this is really light here, but this is really dark colour going up to that. To some extent we got it with that figure there as well, the dark jacket against the light, but again a bit of contrast here, dark against the light bit of the vehicle. Not too precise with the vehicles. I paint in a loose style. We don't need to be too particular with the edges there. We're just giving an impression of the scene. And then concentrating on edges as well. So for example, we've got, as regards edges, we've got that hard edge there. We've got a hard edge here, another vertical, another one there as well. And just little ones, you know, that little bit of light showing through there can make all the difference. So there we are, study of contrasts and verticals. Hope you liked it. Catch up with you next time.